All right, so the topic today is architecting for ads-free subscriptions. Can you explain a little bit the challenge you have right now?
Well, yes, of course. The thing is that as I already explained, I'm not a professional developer, and I needed a guided education on how to approach such topic, which under the hoods appears as the global state management, dynamic global state management, because that's something what depends on whether I have subscribed to a particular application or not. If I have paid subscription, which is of course probably professional iOS developers are probably familiar quite extensively about it, but I'm really not that much, and I wanted to have to hear a sane approach. So to not as you have in your point, because I really don't want to have everywhere around if else, regardless if it is some API module or it is a main module, it's UI, etc. That's basically it.
Right. So usually when you have like this paid and free version, when you pay, let's say you remove the ads from the application. So does you need to update everywhere you show ads, right?
Yes, maybe even add some extra feature and make it visible in the UI. But but essentially, exactly what you have said.
Yeah, it's not just about ads, but any kind of dynamic UI updates based on any kind of state transition or anything like that, right?
Yes, you can actually nail it down to such approach. Yes.
Yeah, because usually the approach you see, the common approach is to have a shared state, some kind of singleton that you access everywhere, and there's if else everywhere. If is paid customer layout somehow, and if there's a change, a notification is sent, then the whole UI updates itself. The problem with this approach is that you have if else everywhere, so your components start getting these responsibilities everywhere. It's hard to develop, it's hard to maintain, it's hard to test because everything is coupled with this.
Yes, tightly coupled. Yes, tightly coupled.
Yeah. So we're not going to look at this approach. We're not going to use. We're not going to look at if else everywhere. We're going to find solutions without if else everywhere. Now, if you have a composition root in your application, that could be easy to do because you can completely recompose your app. So let's look at different approaches. Approaches number one, let's think about recomposing the app when the subscription state changes. It's one approach. Let's think if we have here some kind of free UI. It's just a view controller. Here is not to think about UI or how to create a UI. That's outside the scope of this session. You have a view controller, the background color is yellow if it's free, and the background will be red or green if it's paid. Okay. UI navigation controller, in a navigation controller here. We start with the free UI. The app. So we have an app with the free UI, which is yellow. Let's say that there's be some event that will trigger you to recompose your application for a paid customer. We can have much more features or can have remove the ads from it and so on. So these events can be triggered by an event change. It could be a notification, it could be anything. Here, let's create just a button event, a button tap event. So a bar button item, title, start subscription. I need an image, an action. So this is the action here. This is the event, but it could be anything. It could be a change in state. It could be a notification, a change, a push notification that you receive, whatever. There's been an action that needs to change the layout.
Something happens.
Exactly.
Yes, something
Okay.
happens. Let's capture yourself here. Then you can recompose the application. For example, we set the root view controller, be a new navigation controller with the paid UI, for example. So you recompose the whole application when there's an event.
So self.
And I hope you will agree that look, in 5 minutes, you come up with something that is not even visually appealing, right?
Sorry?
Just in this couple of minutes, like you start typing like a couple of minutes ago, and still you have a feeling something is not right, and it's too much effort. You can already assume later it will be hard to change it, right?
Well, it depends how it's going to be built. It doesn't need to be hard to change, right? It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we don't need a view controller anymore. Let's just make free UI. So we start with a free UI, and when there's an event, we just recompose the UI. For example, start subscription, boom, now you have the paid UI.
Okay.
You can even toggle by sending it back to cancel subscription. It should go back to free UI. As you can see, we have no if statements. You can toggle the subscription and completely recompose your application with a different UI. Make sense?
Yes.
So this is one way you can do it. So when there's an event that triggers this subscription change, you can completely recompose the UI by just setting a new window root view controller.
Yes, you replace the whole view controller with a.
Yeah, so this is one approach. If the UI is so different that it's completely like, you completely need to recompose it.
Yes, you have actually dedicated the whole section of code to one or another variant. Yeah, okay.
And this way you have different compositions when you are in a state and when you are in another state. So you avoid if else everywhere. This is one approach. And then you avoid if else everywhere, because a different composition that can be tested in isolation. You test the free composition and you test the paid composition, for example. So that's the idea. Like there's some event and you just recompose the application. This can be done from the composition root.
Yeah.
So for example, the free UI doesn't need to know about the paid UI. The paid UI doesn't need to know about the free UI. You can develop them in isolation and there won't be any if else statement anywhere. Right? So this is approach one. When you can recompose, because like the UI is so different when it's paid that there are so many more features that it doesn't even make sense to try to make it dynamic. So this is approach one.
Okay.
Now another approach we can have is to, instead of having if else inside each UI, inside each component, is to create a container UI, container view controller that will compose, for example, the paid UI and the free UI. So you may have some UI that has some ads on the top, or on the bottom here is going to show some ads here. So the container will have the ads container view and the content view, for example. And we'll compose the two. So here is just the content, doesn't know anything about ads, and the ads doesn't know anything about the content. Every time there's a change in the ads state or the subscription state, the container will just relay out itself. This way, all the if else stays in one single place in the container only. So the logic stays only in the container instead of moving if else everywhere. The container will manage the state, and when there's a state change, it will update its children. That's another approach. So this way you can adapt dynamically without recomposing everything.
Okay.
Every time there's a change in state, the container will decide. And you can do the same with Swift UI views. Even if you're not using UI view controllers, you can have a container Swift UI view. They will compose and control two different states for each view. So for example, the container Swift UI view, if is paid, you will hide the ads view. There will be only one if. The if statement will be only in the container. It will not propagate into the children.
Yeah, and in case, I don't know, because you mentioned that you're transitioning, if you're not familiar with the container APIs, the container view APIs, there's solid documentation on Apple's website, so make sure to check that out. It's very straightforward and extremely powerful.
The UI view controller container APIs.
Yeah.
And in SwiftUI, it's just a view with a
Yeah.
toggle. For example, every time there is a state change, you will relay out the.
Okay, one can contain others and vice versa.
Yeah.
So this approach works with both SwiftUI and UI view controller. The same thing we're doing here, changing the whole root of your application, also works with SwiftUI.
Okay.
You can completely change the composition at the top level. At the top level, when there's a change in state, you change the whole composition. Or you can create containers, and then down the tree, you can change specific parts as well. And the state management stays in the container, so the children doesn't need to know about that and don't need to have if-else everywhere. So that's approach number 2, containers, either in SwiftUI or UI view controllers.